Hello and welcome to the webinar for establishment projects. My name is Kelly Brown. I work for the Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, or BRS, and I'll be overseeing this project. A request for funding, or RFF, announcement will be issued soon by BRS. In anticipation of that, I'm going to provide an overview of the need for the project, review the RFF response format and required attachments, review the timeline and project components, provide information regarding the federal and match breakouts for how funding works for this project, review the measurable objectives and evaluation criteria, and we'll also review next steps and reminders. After those sections for next steps and reminders, you can conclude the webinar, or you can continue on to hear about the contract deliverables for awarded contractors. So what's the purpose of establishment projects? Why is there a need? The purpose of establishment projects is to increase capacity for the provision of employment services to VR participants. Specific allowable costs for approved VR employment service providers are limited to costs of staffing, to increase capacity, to carry out employment services to VR applicants or eligible individuals. It's also for limited supplies and costs to improve and expand allowable training for employment services staff. This project will have a competitive procurement process where reviewers can award up to 100 points for each RFF. There's also pass-fail criteria that will be reviewed. The competitive procurement process will be for qualified VR employment service providers who demonstrate a need and can meet the requirements outlined in the RFF. And when we say demonstrate a need, we mean is the Community Rehabilitation Program, or CRP, in a position to improve and expand their employment services programs in a manner that results in serving an increased number of VR participants, improving service delivery and timeliness, and increasing the quantity and quality of employment outcomes. And then, of course, receiving allowable training to assist with those overall goals. Activities funded through awarded contracts will support the improvement of CRPs in the provision of vocational rehabilitation services to prepare and support VR participants in achieving competitive integrated employment, supporting an overall BRS goal of increasing the number of participants achieving employment. BRS intends to award up to 15 contracts to eligible respondents who demonstrate a need and are positioned to meet the RFF requirements. This is for public or private nonprofit CRPs who have a VR employment services provider agreement that has been active, non-probationary status at least since July of 2024. Establishment project contracts are expected to begin in July of 2025 and will be for a maximum period of 4 years, as the initial contract is expected to last for up to a 2-year period with a 2-year renewal period. CRP should submit responses to the RFF describing how they will meet the specific requirements of this RFF and the detailed scope and deliverables. Evaluation criteria, which is attachment E in the RFF, must be individually addressed with responses to each item corresponding to the item number. We're going to review the evaluation criteria later on in the presentation, as well as the attachments that must also be included with the RFF response. RFF responses must not exceed 10 pages, not including attachments. Completed proposals will need to be submitted no later than 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time on November 26, 2024. You're going to send in your PDF attachments in an email to establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov. In the subject line, have it labeled as 2025 Establishment Project Proposal. And then just a note there that no more than one proposal per respondent shall be submitted. So still addressing the response format and attachments, the proposals must be assembled in the following manner. A cover letter, which indicates the proposal's principal contact, a letter of application signed by the director or agency board president, a copy of the CRP's financial statement, including an income statement and balance sheet for each of the 2 most recently completed fiscal years. Job description for each proposed new position funded through the project. Agency organizational chart with additional information on project-funded positions. Cost proposal response template. Respondent information. And evaluation criteria. The action items due in 2024 are as follows. October 1, issue of RFF. October 15th, RFF deadline to submit written questions. October 25th, answers provided to written questions. November 26th, RFF proposals due. November 27th through December 30th, evaluation committee meets. And then we're switching to 2025, which the items are due as follows. January 2nd through January 10th, determination of awards and notices of awards. January 11th, contract development begins. And then July 1st of 2025, contract effective date. And then timelines are estimates and subject to change. So this slide is a snapshot of the main components of the project. I'm going to review the top row first and then move to the second row. The CRP must meet the definition of a private or public nonprofit and have been an approved non-probationary VR employment service provider agreement as of July 1, 2024. Allowable staff hired for the establishment project must only deliver employment services to VR applicants or eligible individuals who have been determined eligible to receive VR services. So just to clarify on that second box, this isn't for the CRP as a whole. For example, the CRP can serve BEADS participants and still be eligible for this project. However, the allowable staff hired for the establishment project must be full-time direct service staff who provide employment services to VR applicants or individuals who have been determined eligible to receive VR services. The CRP must be able to meet the non-federal match requirements and deposit funding into a state VR account. Enter into a term agreement of a 2-year period with a 2-year renewal period. Target implementation date of July 1, 2025. The CRP must demonstrate a need to build staff capacity and retention and program growth through allowable training opportunities, as well as identify effective strategies to effectively provide quality employment services, including supported employment for individuals with the most significant disabilities. So just to touch on that box really quickly, what do we mean when we say employment services? Allowable VR employment services provided through establishment projects are defined in detail in the VR Manual of Employment Services, which is located on VR's Employment Services page, with a link provided on this slide. But essentially, we're talking about providing discovery services, job readiness training, outcome-based employment services, supported employment services, on-the-job supports short-term, job search, job placement assistance, and youth extended services. And then the final box is that the CRP must have a sustainability plan to ensure adequate ongoing staff capacity, retention strategies, and training once establishment project funding has ended. Now let's specifically look at the staff capacity component. We've already touched base on the first two bullet points, which is that funding will be utilized to increase capacity to provide VR employment services, including supported employment services to VR applicants or eligible individuals, including those with the most significant disabilities. And that staffing costs must be associated with the provision of VR employment services as outlined in the VR Manual of Employment Services. Allowable staffing costs include staff salaries and fringe benefits for direct VR employment services staff. For example, employment consultants or job coaches, with a caseload that consists entirely of VR participants, 100% VR caseload. Since the purpose of the establishment project is to increase staff capacity, reimbursable staffing costs shall only include staffing costs that result from increasing staff capacity through the creation of a new position or positions that will provide direct service and maintain caseloads of 100% VR applicants or eligible individuals. Allowable staffing funding will be utilized to ensure that the newly hired 100% VR caseload of applicants or eligible individuals will not exceed a caseload size of 120, but with the understanding a caseload size must be at least a 1:10 ratio. Now let's review what 100% VR caseload means. A 100% VR caseload for new employment services staff hired for the purpose of the establishment project means that each participant on the caseload of the direct services staff charged to this project must have a current open case with VR. Participants previously served by VR who have subsequently exited VR and have not reapplied, individuals who have exited and are now served through non-VR funding sources, or individuals who have never applied to VR are not considered to have a current open VR case. Individuals needing important services such as extended services through a home and community-based waiver or supports through Medicaid rehabilitation option should receive those follow-along services through a CRP staff member whose position is not charged to the establishment project. This will ensure that individuals receiving services across different funding streams can access the services they need, while also ensuring compliance with allowable VR establishment project activities. Let's talk a little bit more about the allowable staffing ratios. Newly hired staff must only be hired to meet an overall average caseload ratio ranging from 110 to 120, depending on the level of needs of VR applicants or eligible individuals served. Newly hired staff cannot be hired if the population of VR applicants or eligible individuals served across the employment services unit does not warrant the staffing increase based on the 110 to 120 ratio. If additional staff are hired and the population served later decreases, the CRP must reevaluate the forecasted staffing needs. It is expected that awarded CRPs would employ a minimum of one new full-time employee, or FTE, and a maximum of 5 new FTEs through this agreement. However, additional ES staff needs may be approved by BRS depending on need, as demonstrated through submission of staffing ratio data. BRS will provide a staffing and training narrative report that most likely will be completed by awarded CRPs on a quarterly basis. In this report, we envision the CRP reporting or providing information on the newly hired staff and their assigned caseload. So the caseload ratio is something to be mindful of when preparing your RFF response regarding the number of FTEs to be hired for the 4 years of the project. Unallowable staffing costs. There's a chart here that breaks out certain criteria for recruiting expenses, travel, utilities, supplies and equipment other than the allowable supplies outlined in the RFF, cell phones, leasing, administrative or support staff costs, supervisory or other executive level staff who directly oversee employment service staff, time spent by staff on activities other than those specifically described under allowable staffing costs in the RFF, and costs for any position that existed prior to entering into the establishment project that becomes vacant at any point during the project. Something CRPs will need to be mindful of is staff retention, what that looks like during and after the project ends. CRPs are responsible for improving staff retention, which leads to higher quality services and increased employment placement outcomes. Since the establishment project will assist with staffing costs for newly hired staff, while simultaneously allowing fee-for-service reimbursement for direct service provision by those newly hired staff, it is expected that the CRP will have an increased opportunity to direct available funds towards the implementation of an incentive retention plan. Responses to this RFF must outline strategies for incentivizing staff retention, and awarded CRPs will be required to submit an incentive retention plan to BRS. Awarded CRPs will be responsible for meeting their incentive retention plan goals throughout the contract term and will be required to provide updates to BRS. Criteria surrounding the incentive retention plan is captured in the evaluation criteria, which is attachment E in the RFF. Now let's talk about the training component. RFF responses must have an effective training strategies in place to support growth of CRPs to carry out employment services to VR participants, which will produce the desired outcome of increased capacity to provide quality and timely services to VR applicants and eligible individuals. The establishment project will provide funding for allowable training. Guidance from BRS will be provided, which shall be person-centered, strength-based, and focused on individuals with disabilities' employable strengths. Training must align with a philosophy that individuals with disabilities can obtain competitive integrated employment with the right supports and services. What training costs are allowable for the project? All training activities must be associated with improving the CRP's provision of employment services as outlined in the VR Manual of Employment Services and increasing the quality and quantity of competitive integrated employment outcomes. Allowable training costs may only be charged for the newly hired positions who are serving 100% VR applicants or eligible individuals. Allowable training costs include registration fees for training that meet Association of Certified Rehabilitation Educator or ACRE competencies, registration fees for training carried out by BRS contracted training entities such as Level Up and Benefits Information Network or BIN training. I think our goal is to get a training document out in September to list the allowable training expenses. The training guide won't be all inclusive, but if it's not listed on the training guide, then awarded contractors are required to connect with BRS before incurring any training expenses. Unallowable training costs are any expenses incurred for training to staff who are not funded through this project. For example, human resources training, like sexual harassment training for administrative or clerical staff. Funds can't be allocated for training for supervisory and support staff. Mileage, out-of-state training, per diem, which is meal reimbursement, conference fees, including registration costs, and hotel costs are unallowable expenses. Supplies are limited to one computer, for example, a laptop, per newly created position for the life of the project. For the purposes of this project, who will carry a 100% VR caseload. If computer software needs to be purchased in order to provide direct provision of services to 100% VR applicants or eligible individuals, for example, software for accommodations, completion of VR required documentation, or participation in virtual VR participant meetings, the CRP must obtain prior approval from BRS. Okay, training and supply costs are much easier to cover, so let's review that first. Years 1 through 4 covers allowable training and supply costs at 100%. Of that, VR covers 78.7%, and the CRP non-federal match is 21.3%. This is consistent for all 4 years. Nothing changes. We want to ensure that CRPs have adequate funding in order to provide allowable training for newly hired direct service staff to effectively carry out employment services to VR participants, resulting in providing quality and timely services to VR applicants and eligible individuals, as well as continuing to receive allowable training each year for program growth. Now let's review staffing costs. Staffing costs are a little bit more complicated. Year 1 is covered at 100%, pretty straightforward. Of that 100%, VR will cover staffing costs at 78.7%, and the CRP is responsible for the 21.3% non-federal match. You can see that the additional CRP share is 0%. However, this additional number increases each year for the CRP as the CRP starts to pick up more staffing costs. Let's look at year 2. Staffing cost available for federal and match funds is covered at 75%. Of that 75%, VR will cover 78.7%, and the CRP will provide the 21.3% non-federal match. You'll notice as the percentage of total staff cost available for federal and match funds reduces, the additional CRP share, which is not available to match, increases. For year 2, it increases to 25%, and you'll also notice that the two totals, 75% and 25%, equal 100%. So each year, the percent of total staff cost available for federal and match funds breakout decreases, and the additional CRP share increases to where the CRP starts to pick up more staffing costs, with the two totals adding up to 100%. In year 3, the portion of staffing cost available for federal and match funds is 60%, with the additional CRP share increasing to 40%, totaling 100%. And in year 4, the portion of available federal and match funds is at 45%, with the CRP picking up 55% of the costs, totaling 100%. So looking at this chart, it's more advantageous for a CRP to hire allowable staff in year 1, as 100% of the costs will be covered, and the only portion the CRP has to contribute is the 21.3% non-federal match. I know that the funding information can be a bit confusing, and I'm both a visual person and like to hear or read information. So with that, let's look at 2 cost proposal examples. We've prepared a cost proposal example for you and have based it on hiring 4 full-time employees for the 4-year project. I know the image is small and difficult to read, but I wanted to show you overall what it would look like. We'll zoom in and look at specific sections here in a second. But when you receive the cost proposal, you're only going to use the green boxes to fill in your staffing, supplies, and training costs. The formulas for staffing, which is Table 1 in the RFF, and training, Table 2 in the RFF, are hidden and will automatically calculate the share of costs that can be charged to the project once the green shaded cells include a numeric value. Budgets submitted in a different format and not using the spreadsheet will not be accepted. Let's look at the different sections of the cost proposal zoomed in so it's easier to see. Okay, so you can see here that ABC Inc. is hiring 2 full-time employees in year 1, 1 full-time employee in year 2, and 1 full-time employee in year 3. There are 0 hires in year 4. Now let's look at the budget based off of those 4 full-time employees. In this example for staffing cost, each full-time employee is making $50,000 per year. So year 1 reflects $100,000 for the 2 full-time employees we'll be hiring. In year 2, we're hiring an additional employee, so you'd have your already existing $100,000 for those 2 existing full-time positions, plus now you're adding on an additional $50,000 for the new hire. In year 3, same thing. You have your existing $150,000 plus an additional $50,000 for the additional hire, totaling $200,000. In year 4, we're not hiring anyone else, so staffing costs stay at $200,000. You can then see the yearly breakout for the portion of staffing cost available for the federal and match funds, starting out at 100% in year 1, 75% in year 2, 60% in year 3, and 45% in year 4. Of that number, you can see the 78.7% VR cost and the 21.3% non-federal match for the CRP. For training costs based off of those 4 employees, we're allocating $5,000 per employee per year in this example. So year 1 reflects $10,000 for those 2 staff that we're hiring. Year 2 reflects the existing $10,000 plus an additional $5,000 for the new hire. Same thing in year 3. We have the existing $15,000 in training cost plus an additional $5,000 for the final new hire. In year 4, training costs stay at $20,000 as we aren't hiring anybody else. You can see that each year reflects 100%, with VR contributing 78.7%, and the CRP's portion is at 21.3%. For supplies, we're allocating $250 per employee, a one-time expense to purchase a laptop for the direct service staff member. So year 1 reflects $500 for the 2 new hires. Year 2 reflects the one-time expense of $250 for the employee. Year 3 reflects the one-time purchase of $250 for the additional new hire. And year 4 is 0 as there are no new hires. Then below, you can see the yearly total project expenses as well as the total 4-year project cost. The yearly total breaks out the amount available for the federal and match, and then you can see the 78.7% portion for VR and the overall total for the CRP with the 21.3% match. So hopefully this example helps to see how the staffing, training, and supply costs work each year. Let's look at one more example. We'll simplify it and just have a single hire in year 1. Here's the overall budget for one hire in year 1. Again, I know it's difficult to see, so let's zoom in. We've got our 1 new hire reflected in year 1, and years 2 through 4 reflect 0. So with that 1 new hire in year 1, we're going to allocate a salary of $100,000 each year, just to keep the number simple for the percentage breakouts. You can see year 1 reflects the total at 100% with $100,000 in staffing costs, with VR contributing the 78.7% portion, totaling $78,700, and the CRP contributing the 21.3% non-federal match, totaling $21,300. Year 2 reflects the existing $100,000 staffing cost, and it remains that amount years 2 through 4 as we have no new hires. As only 75% of the staffing costs are available for the federal and match funds in year 2, this shows that the provider picks up more in staffing costs and that the VR and CRP portions decrease each year, with the available amount for federal and match totaling $75,000. Year 3 reflects the existing $100,000 at 60%, totaling $60,000, and year 4 reflects the totals for the 45%, totaling $45,000. For training costs, we've allocated $5,000 each year for the 1 new hire to receive allowable training through the project. This number stays at 100% each year, and so do the federal and match breakouts for VR and the CRP. For supply cost, we're allocating $250 the first year to purchase a laptop for the direct service staff. As we have no new hires in years 2 through 4, that value is set to 0. You can then see the total establishment project cost for each year of the project, the total amounts provided by VR for the 78.7% and the 21.3% provider match, and the overall 4-year project cost. Hopefully, these 2 examples are helpful to see how staffing, training, and supply costs work with the available yearly federal and match percentages. Let's review the match submission of the CRP. So awarded contractors will deposit the non-federal share of expenses into a designated state VR account. It's either going to be an EFT, ACH, or as a wire transfer. You can't mail in a check. Any fees associated with initiating an EFT or an ACH or wire transfer is solely up the bank institution's discretion. It is not determined by the state. So payment of the bank fee, if there is one, is the responsibility of the CRP. Monthly claim reimbursement forms, which will be provided by BRS, must be submitted by awarded contractors to Establishment Project at fssa.in.gov. This will be by the 10th of the following month. So if you have March expenses, they must be submitted by April 10th. BRS will subsequently send an invoice to bill the CRP between the 15th and 18th of the month for the 21.3% non-federal match, at which point the contractor must deposit the non-federal share by the 20th of the month. The contractor's claim will be rejected if the non-federal share is not deposited by the 20th of the month. So it's a tight deadline, and we really have to stick to those dates. Reimbursement is typically provided within 35 days upon receipt of the claim. And of course, the process is always subject to change. Okay, enough about costs. Let's get back into the project and review measurable objectives and required data to be submitted. Awarded contractors will be responsible for providing the requested data to meet objectives, which are numbers 1 through 3 on the next slide, during the project performance period for newly created positions. BRS case management system data may be provided to support the collection and review of data for measurable objectives and outcomes. BRS will work with awarded CRPs to establish a target goal for each CRP based upon system data and CRP provided data. Let's review the 3 measurable objectives. The first objective is focusing on engagement. Continued engagement of participants through achievement of employment goals. We'll have a target goal to be met for each of these bullet points, but the main measures are what percent of the referrals received by the contractor achieved employment service milestone 1? What percent of the referrals received by the contractor achieved employment service milestone 3? How many VR exits with competitive integrated employment have been achieved? Measurable objective 2 will also have set target goals, but this objective is focusing on quality, raising the bar for successful outcomes. The main objectives are: what was the average wage at time of exit for all participants served by the CRP? What were the average weekly work hours for all participants at time of exit served by the CRP? How many performance incentive payment level 1s were achieved? How many performance incentive payment level 2s were achieved? And how many performance incentive payment level 3s were achieved? The final objective focuses on capacity, improved timeliness, and expanded service delivery. Each bullet point will also have set target goals, but the metrics are: what was the average number of direct service hours a VR referral received within the first 30 days of being referred to the CRP? What is the CRP Employment Services Unit's capacity to provide timely and quality services to VR participants? For example, insufficient capacity to serve current referrals, adequate capacity to serve at capacity, capacity to serve an increased number of referrals. Okay, you've heard evaluation criteria referenced throughout the webinar. Let's dive into that. Proposals will be evaluated based upon the proven ability of the CRP to meet the goals of the establishment project. RFF submissions will be evaluated by BRS, and BRS reserves the right to award a contract directly based on responses to this RFF. However, BRS does not guarantee that a contract will result directly from this RFF, as BRS reserves the right to fund applications out of rank order if the top ranked applications do not represent a geographical distribution throughout the state. So let's say we get 4 RFF responses for Central Indiana, but we need more distribution in Southern Indiana. Then an RFF response that received less points might be considered for contract award over one who scored more points. There are 7 evaluation categories for the evaluation criteria with subcomponents for each category, as well as pass-fail criteria. The points associated with each category are indicated following the category name, with total award points equaling 100. When responding to the RFF, the CRP's proposal should be clearly labeled with the headings noted. Let's look at the next slide for those specific headings. Here we have the 7 criteria components with the total points that can be awarded for each section, as well as the total subcomponents, for example, A through E. I'll provide the heading title as well as an example for each one. So number 1 is the extent of the need for the establishment project for staffing and training. For example, did the CRP identify the specific and geographical needs for funding to be awarded through the establishment project? Number 2, staffing ratio and retention. For example, did the CRP outline their strategies and intentions toward directing dollars as a way of incentivizing staff retention? Number 3 is training. For example, did the CRP identify what training opportunities would be available for newly hired staff and who would be offering the training? Number 4 is measurable objectives and contract deliverables. For example, what are the identified strategies to provide more timely services to VR applicants or eligible individuals and improve quality of services and outcomes? Number 5 is program growth. For example, does the CRP's proposal outline specific, effective strategies and address capacity challenges to successfully grow the employment services program within the organization? Number 6 is budget and cost effectiveness. For example, are costs reasonable in relation to the proposed staffing and training objectives? Number 7 is the likelihood of sustaining the proposed program. For example, the likelihood that the proposed enhanced recruitment strategies identified will lead to a stronger applicant pool for allowable staff, resulting in stronger staff retention and higher quality services. And then we also have pass-fail criteria. For example, was the proposal received by the RFF submission deadline? The following attachments are included with this RFF, and certain ones must be incorporated into your responses as applicable. All respondents must complete attachment A, which is the cost proposal response template. We reviewed those 2 examples earlier on in the webinar. Attachment B, which is respondent information. This includes the legal name of the CRP, doing business as, the address, email address, phone number of the organization, and then there are separate sections for contact info for the individual who will be signing the contract, the fiscal point of contact, and the program point of contact. It also has the section for the CRP to mark all counties to be served. And then attachment E, the evaluation criteria, which we just reviewed the 7 specific headings for that one. All right, we've covered mostly everything. What's next? Questions to the RFF must be submitted in electronic format to establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov no later than 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 15th, 2024. Questions or inquiries should be received that are received after 4:30 p.m. Eastern may not be considered. Please keep questions brief and of high priority. Any questions or inquiries must be delivered in an electronic format and have the electronic mailing subject line read Establishment Project Question. Responses to the RFF questions. BRS will compile responses and post responses on the Establishment Project website. So if you go to www.in.gov/FSSA/DDRS/rehabilitation employment, you'll click on Vocational Rehabilitation/employment, and you're going to scroll to the bottom of the page, and under Provider Resources, click on Establishment Project, and information about the project will pull up. There's also a hyperlink directly to that site on the slide here. Only answers posted on the BRS website will be considered official and valid by the state. Submission of RFF response. Proposals are due by November 26, 2024 by 4:30 p.m. Eastern. PDF attachments must be sent in an email to establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov. The subject line must read labeled as 2025 Establishment Project Proposal. I know we covered a lot during this webinar, so just some reminders. All staffing and training templates for the project will be developed by BRS. More to come on this. 10/15/2024. This is the deadline to submit the RFF questions by 4:30 p.m. Eastern to establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov. The RFF proposals are due 11/26/2024. And then just one more thing to note here, this is a project, not a grant. So any communication about the establishment projects, including any social media posts, press releases, etc., should avoid the use of the term grant. Terms such as project or funding or contract are all appropriate. And the reason for this is that we aren't allowed to grant VR dollars. We're federally restricted from entering into grants or subgrants. So that's why the establishment project will be a contract, not a grant. The establishment project email address is listed here, establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov. This is where you'll submit everything establishment project related. We've covered all the RFF requirements with the exception of awarded contractor requirements. You may either conclude the webinar here or continue on to hear about contract deliverables for awarded contracts. If you're ending the webinar, thank you so much for attending. We look forward to receiving RFF proposals and seeing everyone's great ideas. Thanks so much and have a great day. If you're continuing, let's review awarded contractor requirements. Now let's review contract deliverables. To best position service providers for growth and retention, it will be important to develop a training outline and staff retention strategies. For example, training strategies after basic onboarding. This will include the provider's recruitment and retention strategies and a robust training process to support development of competencies and continuous improvement through the project period. So what is the CRP's plan to not only recruit allowable direct service staff, but how will the CRP continue to support the full-time employees with serving an increased number of VR participants, improving service delivery and timeliness, and increasing the quantity and quality of employment outcomes to VR applicants or eligible individuals? CRPs will need to fully answer all evaluation criteria, which is again attachment E, to thoroughly explain the plans for growth, recruitment and retention, and sustainability. Awarded contractors will be required to revise staffing and training strategies annually or as requested by BRS, to outline the CRP's progress with improving staff capacity to support program growth. However, the CRP must submit the initial plan within 30 days of award notification to include items 1, 2, and 5, and at least one of the additional items 3 and/or 4, based on the specific program growth focus of the CRP. BRS will then provide feedback regarding proposed staff training strategies. Awarded contractors will be required to submit a finalized plan based on BRS's feedback within 30 days of receipt of BRS feedback. So let's review the required items, that 1, 2, and 5 I mentioned, and the additional items of 3 and/or 4. Staffing and training plan requirements, number 1, which is required. What are the strategies for program growth? What are the strategies to provide more timely services to VR applicants or eligible individuals and improved quality of services and outcomes? What is the timeline for implementation of strategies and achievement of improved timeliness and quality of services and outcomes? What is the anticipated number of additional VR participants to be served per year of the contract? This will be revisited for years 3 and 4 upon contract renewal. Okay, requirement number 2, which is required. What are the CRP's recruitment and retention strategies? What is the training process for ensuring newly hired staff develop competencies and have continued opportunities for professional development? What standards or goals will be established for staff to promote improvement in timely and quality service delivery to VR applicants or eligible individuals? And here's number 5, which is required. What are the sustainability measures the CRP will implement through enhanced recruitment, retention, and training strategies? The CRP will be responsible for demonstrating how staffing and training strategies and associated costs will be supported after the conclusion of the establishment project. So here's where the staffing and training plan requirements, you get to pick between number 3 and or number 4. You can certainly do both. Number 3 is, as a result of increasing staff capacity and program growth, what are the CRP strategies to serve increased VR applicants or eligible individuals in the current coverage area? And number 4, as a result of increasing staff capacity and program growth, what are the CRP strategies to serve increased VR applicants or eligible individuals in new coverage areas, as agreed to by BRS? We've already touched base on sustainability and retention earlier in the training, but it is important for the CRP to develop a thought-out plan to not only recruit allowable direct service staff, but also how will the CRP continue to support the full-time employee or employees with serving an increased number of VR participants, improving service delivery and timeliness, and increasing the quantity and quality of employment outcomes to VR applicants or eligible individuals during the 4-year project, as well as after the project ends. CRPs must take a proactive approach to identify and implement strategies that lead to sustainability in order to continue to meet and exceed the objectives achieved during the project period. Sustainability strategies that focus solely on reliance of increased referrals from VR is not an adequate sustainability strategy. We understand that serving more people and placing more people results in more money coming in and sustains positions. Serving more individuals is certainly an objective, but sustainability plans should be comprehensive and take into account a plan for the CRP's ongoing capacity to provide timely services, and increase in the quantity and quality of employment outcomes to VR applicants or eligible individuals. For the project, we will be conducting monitoring of awarded CRPs to ensure compliance with federal law. The list on here is not all-inclusive, but things we'd be reviewing would be the source of the match, expenses to verify that only allowable activities are reimbursed, confirming the CRP is implementing the staffing and training strategies outlined in the CRP's proposal. Monitoring may include desk reviews and on-site visits. To conclude, the establishment project email address listed here is establishmentproject@fssa.in.gov. This is where you'll submit everything establishment project related. And with that, thank you so much for attending the Establishment Project webinar. We look forward to receiving RFF proposals and seeing everyone's great ideas. Thanks so much and have a great day.